In the summer of the year 1099, Jerusalem stood at the center of one of the most dramatic moments in medieval history. The city had already witnessed countless sieges, conquests, and changes of rulers over the centuries. Yet what unfolded that year would echo across generations. After a grueling campaign that had lasted nearly 3 years, armies of Western European crusaders finally reached the walls of the Holy City. They had marched across continents, crossed unfamiliar lands, endured starvation, disease, heat, exhaustion, and constant warfare. Many had died long before reaching their destination. Those who remained believed they were carrying out a sacred mission. When the Crusaders breached Jerusalem's defenses in July of 1099, the result was brutal. Contemporary chronicles from both Christian and Muslim sources describe scenes of extraordinary violence. Bloodshed filled the streets. Men, women, and children were killed in large numbers. For the victorious Crusaders, however, the conquest represented the fulfillment of a vow. Many wept openly as they entered the city they had spent years struggling to reach. They prayed at holy sites. They knelt where they believed Christ had walked. They gave thanks for surviving an ordeal that had seemed impossible. Yet victory solved only one problem and immediately created another. Jerusalem had been captured. Holding would be far more difficult. The newly established Kingdom of Jerusalem emerged as a fragile Christian state surrounded by powerful Muslim territories. Its rulers controlled a thin strip of land along the eastern Mediterranean coast. Their population was small. Their resources were limited. Their enemies were numerous. Every mile of territory had to be defended. Every road had to be monitored. Every fortress had to be supplied. Despite these dangers, news of Jerusalem's capture spread rapidly throughout Europe. Pilgrims began preparing for journeys they had dreamed about their entire lives. From the villages of France, from the towns of England, from the kingdoms of the German lands, from Italy, from distant corners of Christian Europe, they came. Some traveled as nobles surrounded by retainers. Others traveled with little more than faith and determination. Many sold property to finance their journey. Some knew they would probably never return. For medieval Christians, visiting Jerusalem was among the most meaningful acts of devotion imaginable. To pray at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, to walk roads associated with the life of Christ, to see sacred places with their own eyes. These experiences promised spiritual rewards beyond measure. But reaching Jerusalem was extraordinarily dangerous. The sea routes carried risks of storms, piracy, and shipwreck. The overland routes were even worse. Bandits watched the roads. Desperate men preyed on travelers. Disease spread easily among large groups. Food shortages were common. And beyond all these dangers stood the reality of ongoing warfare. The Crusader States remained under constant threat. Muslim forces raided border regions. Military patrols could not be everywhere. Pilgrims often found themselves vulnerable in isolated stretches of countryside. Many never completed their journey. Some disappeared entirely. Others were robbed, kidnapped, or killed. As years passed, these dangers became increasingly apparent. The Kingdom of Jerusalem desperately needed soldiers. Not merely temporary crusaders who would serve for a few years and return home. It needed permanent defenders. Men who would remain in the Holy Land year after year. Men whose primary purpose would be protecting pilgrims and defending Christian territory. Among those who recognized this need was a French knight named Hugh de Payens. The details of Hugh's early life remain uncertain. Medieval records are incomplete. Many documents have been lost. What survives provides only fragments. But those fragments reveal a figure who would become central to one of the most remarkable stories of the Middle Ages. Hugh likely came from the region of Champagne in northeastern France. He was not among the greatest nobles of Europe. He was not a king. He was not a famous prince. He was a knight of relatively modest standing. Yet history often turns on individuals whose influence exceeds their rank. At some point during the early years of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, Hugh began developing an idea that would transform medieval Christendom. The concept was unusual. In some ways, it was revolutionary. Christian monasticism already existed. Monks lived lives devoted to prayer, discipline, and service to God. Knighthood also existed. Warriors fought battles, defended territories, and served their lords. Traditionally, these worlds remained separate. Monks prayed, knights fought. The idea of combining the two seemed contradictory. After all, Christianity had long struggled with the moral implications of violence. How could a man devote himself fully to God while simultaneously carrying a sword? How could warfare and religious devotion coexist within a single institution? These questions had no simple answers. Yet conditions in the Holy Land demanded new solutions. Sometime around the year 1119, Hudipayans and a small group of companions took an extraordinary step. According to later tradition, there were initially 9 knights. The exact number remains debated by historians. Medieval chroniclers often preferred symbolic numbers. Nevertheless, the essential reality appears clear. A very small group of knights committed themselves to a unique mission. They took religious vows. They embraced poverty. They pledged chastity. They swore obedience. At the same time, they remained warriors. Their purpose was not withdrawal from the world. Their purpose was active defense of Christian pilgrims. This combination made them something entirely new. They were neither ordinary monks nor ordinary knights. They became warrior monks. Their organization began humbly. There were no great castles. There were no vast estates. There was no treasure, no enormous army, no international influence. Only a handful of dedicated men trying to address a dangerous problem. King Baldwin II of Jerusalem quickly recognized the potential value of their mission. The kingdom faced constant military shortages. Reliable defenders were precious. The king granted the group quarters on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Specifically, they were housed in a structure that Crusaders identified with the ancient Temple of Solomon. Modern historians know this belief was historically inaccurate. The building was actually the Al-Aqsa Mosque, but medieval Europeans believed they were living on the site of Solomon's temple. From this association came the name that would become famous throughout the world. Officially, they were known as the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. Most people eventually shortened this title. They became simply the Knights Templar. The name endured. Their early years were marked by genuine hardship. The image often associated with the Templars today is one of immense wealth and power. That reality belonged to the future. The first Templars were poor, very poor. They lacked resources. They lacked influence. Their equipment was often secondhand. Armor was expensive. Weapons required maintenance. Horses represented major investments. The order struggled to acquire even basic necessities. One symbol from these years became especially famous. The Templar seal depicted 2 knights riding a single horse. Modern observers sometimes interpret this image in various ways, but one of its traditional meanings reflected the order's poverty. They could not always afford separate mounts. Resources were limited. Every coin mattered. Every donation mattered. The roads of the Holy Land remained dangerous. The Templars did what they could. They escorted pilgrims. They patrolled routes when possible. They provided protection wherever their small numbers allowed. Yet Hudipayans understood a difficult truth. Good intentions alone would never accomplish the mission. If the order was going to survive, it needed legitimacy. It needed recognition. It needed support from powerful institutions. Most importantly, it needed resources. Protecting pilgrims required horses. Horses required money. Weapons required money. Armor required money. Food required money. Permanent military service required a steady stream of recruits and supplies. Without outside backing, the experiment would eventually collapse. For several years, the Templars remained relatively obscure. They attracted some local support. They earned respect among those familiar with conditions in the Holy Land. But Europe remained largely unaware of them. That situation could not continue. Around 1127, Hugh de Payens made a decision that would change everything. He left Jerusalem and returned to Europe. The journey itself was significant. Travel between the Holy Land and Western Europe was neither quick nor comfortable. Months could pass on the road. Ships faced constant hazards. Communication moved slowly. Yet Hugh understood the necessity. If the Templars were to become more than a small local brotherhood, they required approval from the highest authorities in Christendom. His mission was ambitious, perhaps impossibly ambitious. He needed support from nobles, support from church leaders, support from influential figures whose endorsements could transform public perception. Most importantly, he needed recognition from the church itself. Without formal approval, the order would remain vulnerable. Without legitimacy, recruitment would suffer. Without recognition, donations would remain limited. Hugh traveled across parts of Europe explaining the situation in the Holy Land. He spoke about pilgrims. He spoke about danger. He spoke about the need for permanent defenders. His message resonated. The memory of the First Crusade remained powerful. Many Europeans still felt deep emotional connections to Jerusalem. The idea of supporting men who protected pilgrims appealed to both religious devotion and practical necessity. Timing also favored the Templars. The initial excitement generated by the First Crusade had begun fading. Reports from the East reminded Europeans that the Crusader States remained vulnerable. Concern about their future grew steadily. The Templars offered a way for people to contribute. Not everyone could travel to the Holy Land. Not everyone could fight, but many could donate. Many could support an institution dedicated to defending Christian interests in Palestine. As Hugh continued his campaign, he attracted increasingly influential allies. Among them was one of the most powerful churchmen of the age, Bernard of Clairvaux. Bernard was not merely respected. He was one of the most influential voices in medieval Europe. An abbot, a reformer, a theologian, a preacher whose words carried enormous weight. When Bernard supported a cause, people listened. When Bernard opposed a cause, people noticed. His backing would prove decisive. Bernard saw something significant in the Templars. He believed they represented a solution to a long-standing problem. Medieval society depended heavily on warriors. Knights occupied positions of power throughout Europe. Yet Christian thinkers often worried about the violence associated with knighthood. How could warriors live holy lives? How could military service align with spiritual goals? The Templars appeared to offer an answer. Here were men whose martial abilities served explicitly religious purposes. Here were knights whose violence, at least in theory, existed solely for the defense of pilgrims and Christian territories. Bernard embraced this concept enthusiastically. His support gave the order credibility it could never have achieved alone. In 1129, a major milestone arrived. The Council of Troyes convened in France. Among its many concerns was the status of the Templars. Church leaders gathered. Discussions took place. Arguments were made. At the conclusion of the process, the Templars received formal recognition. The significance of this moment cannot be overstated. Recognition transformed the order from an experimental brotherhood into an officially sanctioned religious institution. The Church approved its existence. The Church approved its mission. The Church approved its structure. The consequences were immediate and profound. Potential recruits now knew the order possessed ecclesiastical legitimacy. Potential donors gained confidence. Nobles became more willing to contribute land and resources. Church leaders offered support. The Templars suddenly possessed something far more valuable than money. They possessed credibility. With recognition came organization. Rules were established. Discipline was formalized. Daily life became regulated according to detailed guidelines. The Templars would pray at specific times, eat according to specific rules, dress according to specific standards, obey superiors without hesitation. The order developed a structure that combined military efficiency with monastic discipline. This combination became one of its greatest strengths. Individual bravery mattered, but discipline mattered more. The Templars sought to create warriors who functioned as part of a unified institution rather than independent adventurers seeking personal glory. Gradually, support increased. Land donations appeared. Financial gifts arrived. Recruitment improved. The tiny brotherhood founded by Hugh de Payens began expanding beyond anything its founders could have imagined. Yet at this stage, the future remained uncertain. The Order still faced enormous challenges. The Holy Land remained dangerous. The Crusader States remained vulnerable. Resources, though increasing, were still limited. No one could predict that these once poor knights would eventually become one of the most powerful organizations in medieval Europe. No one could foresee vast estates stretching across kingdoms. No one could foresee fleets, castles, banking networks, and international influence. All of that still lay ahead. For now, the Templars remained what they had originally set out to become: a brotherhood of warrior monks, guardians of dangerous roads, protectors of pilgrims, an experiment unlike anything Christendom had seen before. And as the 1130s approached, the foundations had finally been laid for a transformation that would reshape both the Crusader States and medieval Europe itself. The Age of the Knights Templar had truly begun. The approval granted at Troyes changed everything. For nearly a decade, the Templars had existed on the margins of history. They were respected by some, known by a few, important within the Kingdom of Jerusalem, yet largely unknown across much of Europe. After 1129, that changed with astonishing speed. The Order now possessed official recognition from the Church. More importantly, it possessed powerful advocates who understood how to shape public opinion. Among them, no figure mattered more than Bernard of Clairvaux. To understand the rise of the Templars, it is impossible to ignore Bernard's influence. Few individuals in medieval Europe carried greater authority. Kings sought his advice. Popes listened to his opinions. Church councils respected his judgment. When Bernard spoke, people paid attention. And Bernard did far more than merely support the Templars. He provided them with an ideology. He gave them a purpose that resonated far beyond the roads of Palestine. For centuries, Christian thinkers had struggled with the relationship between faith and warfare. The teachings of Christ emphasized peace. The reality of medieval society revolved around violence. Kingdoms depended on warriors. Borders were defended by armies. Nobles maintained power through force. This contradiction troubled many religious leaders. Bernard believed the Templars offered a solution. In his famous work known today as In Praise of the New Knighthood, he presented the Order as something entirely different from ordinary warriors. According to Bernard, the typical knight fought for wealth, for status, for pride, for personal ambition. The Templar fought for God. The ordinary knight sought earthly rewards. The Templar sought spiritual rewards. The ordinary knight risked his soul through violence. The Templars sanctified violence through service. This argument was revolutionary. Bernard was not merely defending the existence of the Order. He was redefining the role of the warrior within Christian society. His words spread across Europe. They were copied by scribes, read in monasteries, discussed by nobles, repeated by priests. The image of the Templar began to take shape, not as a mercenary, not as a feudal soldier, but as a holy warrior, a man whose sword served divine purposes. This image proved incredibly powerful. Young nobles listened. Parents listened. Churchmen listened. The result was a surge of interest unlike anything the Order had experienced before. Men began volunteering. Donations increased. Support expanded. The small group founded by Hugh de Payens started growing into a truly international institution. The Order developed a clear structure. At its core stood the Knight Brothers. These were men of noble birth, experienced warriors, trained in combat from childhood. They wore the famous white mantle that would become one of the most recognizable symbols of the medieval world. The white cloak represented purity. Later, a red cross would be added, creating the image most people associate with the Templars today. Beneath the knights stood the sergeants. These men came from less noble backgrounds. Many were skilled soldiers. Others served administrative functions. Though they lacked the prestige of the Knight Brothers, they were essential to the operation of the Order. Without them, the Templars could not function. There were also chaplains, ordained priests responsible for the spiritual life of the Brotherhood. They conducted religious services, heard confessions, administered sacraments, provided theological guidance, and surrounding all of these groups existed a vast support network. Servants, laborers, craftsmen, farmers, administrators. The image of the Templars often focuses on armored knights charging into battle. The reality was much more complex. Every knight depended upon an entire system of support. Someone cared for horses. Someone maintained armor. Someone managed finances. Someone recorded transactions. Someone cultivated fields. As the Order expanded, this administrative machinery became increasingly sophisticated. The growth was astonishing. Across France, donations poured in. Landowners gifted estates. Nobles transferred farms. Wealthy families offered money. Churches provided support. Sometimes these gifts came from genuine devotion. Sometimes they reflected hopes for spiritual rewards. Many medieval Christians believed donations to religious institutions could help secure salvation. Supporting the Templars seemed especially attractive. The Order defended holy places, protected pilgrims, fought enemies of Christendom. To many donors, supporting such an institution appeared deeply virtuous. The Templars benefited enormously. Every donation strengthened their position. Every estate expanded their economic base. Every recruit increased their military capabilities. Within a few years, the Order possessed properties across multiple kingdoms. These properties became known as commanderies or preceptories. Each served multiple functions. Some operated as farms. Others functioned as administrative centers. Many provided lodging for traveling members. Some acted as recruitment hubs. Together, they formed a network stretching across Europe. This network became one of the greatest strengths in the history of the Order. Most medieval institutions were local. Their influence remained limited by geography. The Templars were different. They connected distant regions through a unified organizational structure. A donation made in England could support military operations in Palestine. Resources gathered in France could be shipped to Jerusalem. Information traveled along the same routes. The Order became increasingly interconnected. Its reach extended far beyond the Holy Land. Meanwhile, the situation in Palestine remained dangerous. The Kingdom of Jerusalem still faced powerful enemies. Muslim rulers controlled vast territories surrounding the Crusader States. Raids remained common. Warfare remained constant. Pilgrims still required protection. The Templars, therefore, continued developing their military capabilities. Training intensified. Discipline became stricter. The Order cultivated a reputation for professionalism. This professionalism distinguished them from many secular knights. Medieval warfare often suffered from poor coordination. Individual nobles pursued personal glory. Command structures broke down. Armies fragmented. The Templars sought something different. They emphasized obedience. A Templar knight followed orders. A Templar knight remained in formation. A Templar knight placed the mission above personal ambition. This approach made them extraordinarily effective. It also made them unusual. In a world where individual valor often overshadowed collective discipline, the Templars represented a more organized model of warfare. Their reputation spread quickly. Friends admired them. Enemies respected them. Even critics acknowledged their effectiveness. Yet recognition from Troyes was only the beginning. A second milestone would elevate the order even further. In 1139, Pope Innocent II issued a papal bull known as Omni Datum Optimum. The document transformed the legal status of the Templars. Its effects would shape the order's future for generations. Under normal circumstances, religious institutions operated within local church hierarchies. Bishops exercised authority. Archbishops exercised authority. Various ecclesiastical officials supervised religious organizations. The Templars received something extraordinary. They were exempted from much of this system. The order answered directly to the Pope. Local bishops could not easily interfere. Regional church authorities possessed limited influence. The Templars gained unprecedented independence. The privileges extended further. They could maintain their own chaplains. They could establish churches. They could collect certain revenues. They enjoyed exemptions from various taxes and obligations. For an organization operating across multiple kingdoms, these privileges were immensely valuable. They reduced interference, simplified administration, protected resources, strengthened autonomy. Many people did not immediately appreciate how significant these privileges would become. Over time, however, they created one of the most powerful institutions in medieval Europe. The Templars now operated under direct papal protection. Kings could not easily control them. Local bishops could not easily regulate them. Regional authorities could not easily tax them. This independence allowed rapid growth. It also planted the seeds of future resentment. For the moment, however, the benefits far outweighed the risks. The order flourished. Across Europe, commanderies multiplied. In France, in England, in Scotland, in the Iberian Peninsula, in the Italian states. Everywhere the same pattern emerged. Land produced revenue. Revenue funded military operations. Military operations reinforced the order's reputation. Reputation attracted additional donations. The cycle repeated continuously. As resources increased, the Templars improved their position in the Holy Land. More horses arrived. Better equipment arrived. Additional recruits arrived. Castles received supplies. Roads received patrols. The military presence of the order expanded dramatically. What had once been a handful of knights escorting pilgrims evolved into a significant military force. The transformation happened surprisingly fast. By the 1140s, the Templars had become indispensable to the Crusader States. Kings relied upon them. Nobles sought their assistance. Military campaigns increasingly depended upon their participation. The order had achieved something remarkable. It combined religious legitimacy, military effectiveness, administrative sophistication, international reach, and growing financial strength. Few institutions could match this combination. The Hospitallers represented a similar model. Some powerful monasteries possessed wealth. Certain noble families controlled vast territories. Yet the Templars occupied a unique position. They existed simultaneously as monks, warriors, landowners, administrators, and servants of the papacy. No previous organization had combined these roles so successfully. The growth affected recruitment as well. Young nobles viewed the order with admiration. Joining the Templars offered purpose, adventure, prestige, spiritual significance. A man could dedicate his life to God without abandoning the martial traditions of his class. For many knights, this combination proved irresistible. Families sometimes encouraged sons to join. particularly younger sons who would inherit little property. The order offered status, security, and spiritual rewards. As membership expanded, the Brotherhood became increasingly diverse. French knights remained dominant, but recruits arrived from across Europe. Different languages, different customs, different backgrounds, all united by the same rule, the same vows, the same mission. This diversity strengthened the organization. It also required effective leadership. Communication became more complex. Administration became more demanding. Managing properties across continents required remarkable organizational skill. The Templars developed those skills. Their records became more detailed. Their systems became more efficient. Their influence continued growing. To outside observers, the rise seemed extraordinary. Only a few decades earlier, they had been poor guardians patrolling dangerous roads. Now, they owned extensive estates, maintained military forces, enjoyed papal protection, and operated one of the largest organizational networks in Christendom. Yet beneath this success lay an important question. Could the order remain faithful to its founding ideals? The original Templars had embraced poverty, simplicity, service, humility. Now wealth flowed steadily into their hands. Land accumulated, power expanded, influence increased. History repeatedly demonstrates that institutions change when they become successful. The Templars would face the same challenge. How could a brotherhood founded on poverty manage enormous resources? How could warrior monks maintain humility while becoming increasingly powerful? How could an organization dedicated to protecting pilgrims avoid being transformed by its own success? At first, these questions remained largely theoretical. The order still possessed a clear mission. The Holy Land remained dangerous. Military demands remained constant. Resources flowed toward a visible purpose. Few questioned the necessity of supporting the defense of Jerusalem. Yet the future would test the Templars in ways their founders could never have imagined. The roads of Palestine had created the order. The wealth of Europe was reshaping it. And soon, the warrior monks who had risen from obscurity would find themselves standing at the center of some of the greatest struggles of the medieval world. The age of expansion was ending. The age of warfare was about to begin. By the middle of the 12th century, the Knights Templar had become far more than guardians of pilgrims. They were now soldiers in the fullest sense of the word. Everything the order had built in Europe ultimately served one purpose. Their farms funded war. Their donations funded war. Their recruitment efforts funded war. The roads they protected, the castles they garrisoned, the wealth they accumulated. Everything pointed toward the defense of the Crusader States. The Templars lived in a world where warfare was constant. Raids crossed borders almost every year. Cities changed hands. Alliances shifted. Truces were signed and broken. Peace rarely lasted long. A knight joining the order understood that death was not merely possible. It was likely. The Holy Land consumed lives at an astonishing rate. Yet men continued arriving. Many saw service with the Templars as the highest expression of Christian knighthood. The order cultivated that image carefully. Its members took vows similar to monks. But unlike monks, they expected to face battle regularly. This created a unique identity. A Templar was not simply a warrior who happened to be religious, nor was he a monk who occasionally carried weapons. He was both at the same time. The fusion of those identities shaped everything about the order. The daily life of a Templar reflected this balance. Prayer structured the day. Religious services remained mandatory. Discipline governed behavior. Yet alongside these spiritual obligations stood military preparation. Weapons had to be maintained. Horses had to be trained. Armor had to be inspected. Combat skills required constant practice. A Templar's life revolved around readiness. Readiness for prayer. Readiness for battle. Unlike many secular knights, Templars operated within a highly disciplined command structure. This distinction mattered enormously. Medieval warfare often suffered from poor coordination. Individual nobles pursued personal glory. They launched unauthorized charges, ignored orders, broke formations, pursued fleeing enemies. Such behavior could transform victory into disaster. The Templars attempted to eliminate these problems. Obedience was central to their identity. Orders were expected to be followed immediately. A knight could not simply decide to act independently because he believed he saw an opportunity. He remained part of a larger force. This discipline became one of the Order's greatest military strengths. Enemies noticed it. Allies noticed it. Observers recorded it repeatedly. The Templars fought as units rather than collections of individuals. That distinction gave them advantages on the battlefield. Their organization reflected this emphasis on structure. At the top stood the Grand Master. Beneath him operated senior officials responsible for various aspects of the order. Military leadership remained clearly defined. Regional commanders oversaw specific territories. Castle commanders managed individual fortresses. Officers supervised smaller units. Every member understood his place within the hierarchy. This clarity reduced confusion during campaigns. It also allowed the order to function effectively even under extreme pressure. The battlefield reputation of the Templars emerged gradually. It was not created through a single dramatic victory. Rather, it developed through years of consistent performance. Campaign after campaign, siege after siege, battle after battle. The same qualities appeared: discipline, courage, persistence, professionalism. These characteristics made the Templars valuable. Crusader armies often included men from many different regions: French nobles, German nobles, Italian contingents, local forces, military orders. Coordination could be difficult. The Templars provided stability. Commanders knew what to expect from them. They would hold positions, maintain formations, follow orders, fight effectively. That reliability became a strategic asset. The Order also developed expertise unavailable to many newly arrived Crusaders. Most European knights spent only limited periods in the Holy Land. A few years, sometimes less. Then they returned home. The Templars remained. Year after year, decade after decade. They learned the terrain, studied local conditions, observed enemy tactics, accumulated institutional knowledge. This experience mattered enormously. The Middle East presented challenges unfamiliar to many Europeans. Climate, geography, logistics, enemy tactics. Everything differed from conditions in Western Europe. The Templars adapted. They learned to respect their opponents. This respect did not imply admiration, nor friendship. It reflected practical reality. The Muslim armies confronting the Crusader States contained highly skilled warriors. Particularly dangerous were mounted archers. These horsemen combined mobility with deadly accuracy. They could attack rapidly, withdraw before retaliation, harass larger forces. Disrupt formation, wear down opponents through constant pressure. European knights initially struggled against such tactics. The Templars gradually learned how to respond. Discipline became essential. Impulsive charges often failed. Controlled maneuvers proved more effective. Patience became as important as courage. These lessons were expensive. Many lives were lost learning them. But the Order adapted. Its military methods evolved. Its reputation grew. One of the most distinctive aspects of Templar warfare involved cavalry charges. Heavy cavalry represented the dominant shock force of medieval warfare. When properly executed, a charge could shatter enemy formations. The sight alone could be terrifying. Armored knights, war horses accelerating toward impact, lances lowered, banners flying, the ground trembling beneath hundreds of hooves. Few experiences in medieval warfare inspired greater fear. The Templars became masters of this tactic. Their charges relied upon discipline. Speed alone was insufficient. Timing mattered. Formation mattered. Coordination mattered. A scattered charge lost effectiveness. A unified charge multiplied it. Templar units trained extensively to maintain cohesion. When they struck together. Observers described these attacks as devastating. Even experienced enemies respected their power. Yet cavalry charges represented only part of the Order's military role. The Templars also served as scouts, garrison troops, castle defenders, escort forces, shock troops. Their responsibilities varied according to circumstances. Flexibility became necessary. The Holy Land demanded it. One campaign might involve open battle. Another might involve siege warfare. A third might focus on protecting supply lines. The Order had to be prepared for all possibilities. Its castles became especially important. Throughout the Crusader States, fortifications served as anchors of defense. Without castles, territory could not be held. Without strongholds, armies lacked secure bases. The Templars invested heavily in these structures. Stone walls, massive towers, deep cisterns, storage facilities, everything designed for endurance. Some castles controlled strategic roads. Others guarded mountain passes. Still others protected vital regions near borders. Together, they formed a defensive network. Each fortress extended the reach of the Crusader States. Each represented a commitment to permanence. The Templars understood that castles did more than resist attacks. They projected power. A fortress dominating a region influenced trade, movement, security, politics. Even when armies were absent, castles exerted control. This insight shaped Templar strategy for generations. One of the earliest major tests of the Order came during the turbulent decades following its recognition. The Crusader States faced repeated threats. Neighboring Muslim powers remained strong. Political conditions shifted constantly. Military pressure never disappeared. The Templars participated in numerous campaigns, sometimes victorious, sometimes unsuccessful, but always present, always involved. As their battlefield reputation expanded, so did expectations. People began viewing the Templars as elite troops, the best available warriors. The men expected to hold when others broke. Such expectations carried advantages. They inspired confidence, yet they also created pressure. Failure became more visible. Every defeat attracted attention. Every mistake attracted criticism. The Order learned that reputation could be both asset and burden. The Second Crusade provided one of the most significant opportunities for the Templars to demonstrate their value. Launched in 1147, the Crusade emerged in response to growing concerns about the security of Christian territories in the East. Europe responded with enthusiasm. Major rulers joined. Large armies assembled. Expectations ran high. Many believed another great success similar to the First Crusade was possible. Reality proved far harsher. The overland journey exposed Crusaders to relentless difficulties. Particularly devastating were attacks by Turkish forces in Anatolia. Mounted archers harassed marching columns continuously. Stragglers disappeared. Supply problems multiplied. Morale suffered. Large armies found themselves vulnerable despite their size. The German contingent suffered catastrophic losses. The French faced similar challenges. In this difficult environment, the Templars demonstrated why they had become valuable. King Louis VII of France entrusted them with significant responsibilities. They helped organize movement, protected vulnerable sections of the army, maintained discipline during dangerous marches. When attacks occurred, Templars often absorbed the heaviest pressure. Their professionalism reduced chaos. Their experience proved invaluable. The The crusade ultimately failed. Its objectives were not achieved. The siege of Damascus collapsed amid confusion and poor decision-making. Yet many participants emerged with increased respect for the military orders. The Templars had not caused a disaster. In some cases, they had warned against mistakes that others ignored. Their reputation survived intact, perhaps even strengthened. Back in the Holy Land, the Order continued expanding its military role. Templars became permanent fixtures within Crusader defense systems. They manned frontier positions, conducted reconnaissance missions, supported royal armies, protected strategic locations. The distinction between the Order and the broader military structure of the Crusader States became increasingly blurred. The Templars were no longer merely assisting. They had become essential. Their commitment to fighting until death contributed heavily to their reputation. The Templar rule discouraged surrender. Retreat required authorization. Abandoning positions without orders could result in severe punishment. These regulations created a culture of extraordinary determination. Enemies noticed. Story spread. The image of Templars fighting to the last man became common. Sometimes these stories were exaggerated. Medieval chroniclers loved dramatic narratives. Yet enough examples existed to sustain the reputation. Many Templars genuinely preferred death to surrender. They viewed martyrdom as honorable. A warrior dying in service to God achieved spiritual victory regardless of military outcome. This belief shaped behavior. It inspired courage. It also contributed to heavy casualties. The Order paid a price for its ideals. Again and again, campaign after campaign, generation after generation. Its cemeteries filled with men who had embraced the consequences of their vows. By the latter half of the 12th century, the Templars occupied a position unlike any other military institution in Christendom. They possessed castles, armies, wealth, religious legitimacy, international support, and a battlefield reputation feared by enemies and admired by allies. Yet success brought new dangers. The Order's influence expanded. Its responsibilities multiplied. Its resources increased. And as often happens in history, growing power attracted growing expectations. The Templars had become symbols of the Crusader cause itself. People expected them to defend the Holy Land, expected them to protect Christian territories, expected them to stand firm against every threat. But no institution, no matter how disciplined, could control every event. No order, no matter how brave, could guarantee victory. Beyond the borders of the Crusader States, powerful forces were gathering. Leaders were emerging. Kingdoms were changing. The balance of power in the Middle East was shifting, and soon the Templars would face a challenge greater than anything they had encountered before. A challenge embodied in the rise of one of the most famous figures of medieval history. A man whose name would become inseparable from the story of the Crusades. Saladin. And when that confrontation came, it would test the Templars more severely than ever before. It would shake the Crusader States to their foundations. And it would lead directly to one of the greatest disasters in the history of the Order. For decades, the Crusader States had survived not simply because of military strength, but because their enemies were divided. This reality often goes unnoticed when people think about the Crusades. The Christian kingdoms established after the First Crusade were relatively small. Their populations were limited. Their resources were stretched. Their survival depended as much upon political circumstances as military skill. The Muslim world surrounding them was rarely united. Rulers competed against one another. Cities pursued their own interests. Dynasties fought rival dynasties. Ambitious leaders struggled for influence. These divisions created opportunities. When one Muslim ruler threatened the Crusaders, another might quietly prefer that threat be weakened. Diplomacy became as important as warfare. Alliances shifted constantly. Temporary partnerships formed. Enemies became allies. Allies became enemies. The Crusader States learned how to navigate this complicated environment. For a time, it worked. But history rarely remains static. Eventually, a leader emerged who possessed both military talent and political vision. A leader capable of changing the balance of power. His name was Salah ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub. History remembers him simply as Saladin. Born around 1137, Saladin did not initially appear destined for greatness. He came from a Kurdish family connected to military service. As a young man, he showed little indication that he would become one of the most influential figures of his era. His rise was gradual, unexpected, built through opportunity, intelligence, and determination. By the 1160s, the political landscape of the Middle East was changing rapidly. Egypt, one of the wealthiest regions in the world, became the focus of intense competition. Control of Egypt meant access to enormous resources. Agricultural wealth, strategic ports, trade routes, military manpower. Whoever controlled Egypt possessed a powerful advantage. Saladin became deeply involved in these struggles. Through a combination of military success and political skill, he eventually rose to leadership. From there, his influence expanded steadily. Unlike many rulers before him, Saladin pursued a larger goal. He wanted unity. He wanted the Muslim territories surrounding the Crusader States brought together under common leadership. This objective required patience, military campaigns, diplomatic negotiations, political maneuvering, years of effort. But gradually he succeeded. Egypt came under his authority. Large portions of Syria followed. Other territories aligned with his vision. The fragmented political landscape that had protected the Crusader States began disappearing. For the first time in generations, a single leader controlled vast regions surrounding the Christian kingdoms. The implications were enormous. The Crusader States suddenly faced a strategic threat unlike anything they had experienced before. Many leaders recognized the danger. The Templars recognized it. The Hospitallers recognized it. Experienced nobles recognized it. A united enemy represented a fundamentally different challenge. Saladin was not merely another regional ruler. He was creating a coalition capable of sustained large-scale warfare. At first, conflict remained limited. Raids occurred. Skirmishes occurred. Negotiations continued. Truces were established. Broken. Renewed. The familiar rhythm of frontier politics persisted. Yet beneath the surface, tensions increased steadily. By the 1180s, confrontation appeared increasingly inevitable. Unfortunately for the Crusader States, internal divisions weakened their response. Political disputes consumed attention. Nobles argued. Factions emerged. Personal rivalries influenced decision-making. At precisely the moment unity was most needed, disagreements intensified. Among the most controversial figures of this period was Gerard de Rydefort. He served as Grand Master of the Knights Templar. Accounts of his personality vary. Some chroniclers portray him as courageous but reckless. Others describe him as arrogant and impulsive. Whatever the truth, his leadership would become closely associated with catastrophe. In early 1187, events began accelerating toward disaster. Saladin launched operations against Crusader territory. These actions were not yet the full-scale invasion that would come later, but they increased pressure, created uncertainty, forced responses. One encounter proved especially significant. At a place known as the Springs of Crescent, a small Templar-led force encountered a much larger Muslim army. The disparity in numbers was obvious. Retreat would have been sensible. Caution would have been logical. Instead, Gerard de Rydefort chose agression. The Templars charged. The result was devastating. The force was virtually destroyed. Most of the knights died. Only a handful escaped. The battle itself did not determine the fate of the kingdom. Its military significance was limited. Its psychological significance was enormous. The defeat demonstrated that even elite forces could be overwhelmed. The aura of invincibility surrounding the Templars suffered a serious blow. Saladin observed carefully. He understood momentum. He understood opportunity. And he recognized that the moment for a major campaign had arrived. Soon afterward, he launched a full-scale invasion. The army he assembled was formidable. Modern historians debate exact numbers. Medieval chroniclers often exaggerated. Regardless of precise figures, the force was massive by contemporary standards. The Kingdom of Jerusalem responded with urgency. Every available knight was summoned. Every available soldier was gathered. Military orders committed their strength. The Templars sent large contingents. The Hospitallers did the same. The kingdom concentrated its resources for what everyone understood might become a decisive confrontation. The Crusader army assembled at Sephoria. The location offered important advantages. Water was plentiful. The terrain favored defense. Supply conditions were manageable. Many experienced advisors argued strongly for remaining there. Their reasoning was sound. Summer heat in the region could be deadly. Large armies consumed enormous quantities of water. If Saladin wished to attack, he would have to do so under difficult circumstances. Patience favored the defenders. Yet patience is often difficult during moments of crisis. Pressure mounted. Arguments intensified. Reports arrived indicating that Tiberius was threatened. Some leaders demanded action. Others urged caution. King Guy of Jerusalem found himself caught between competing opinions. Unfortunately, the advocates of immediate action prevailed. The decision would become one of the most consequential in Crusader history. The army left Sephoria. It marched toward Tiberius. The consequences appeared almost immediately. The route crossed dry terrain. Water became scarce. Heat intensified. Saladin's forces shadowed the march. They harassed the Crusaders continuously. Mounted archers attacked, retreated, returned, again and again. The harassment prevented effective movement. Exhaustion spread. Morale weakened. Progress slowed. By evening, the Crusader army found itself in an increasingly desperate situation. Water remained distant. Temperatures remained oppressive. Enemy forces surrounded them. The army halted near a volcanic formation known as the Horns of Hattin. The location would soon become legendary. That night was miserable, perhaps one of the worst nights many soldiers had ever experienced. Thirst tormented men and horses alike. Saladin's forces controlled access to water. Fires were reportedly set in surrounding vegetation. Smoke drifted toward the exhausted Crusaders. Sleep proved difficult. Everyone understood what morning would bring. Battle, and many likely sensed that conditions were already turning against them. When dawn arrived on July 4th, 1187, the situation deteriorated rapidly. The Crusader army attempted movement, but thirst had become overwhelming. Formation discipline weakened. Units struggled to maintain cohesion. Muslim forces exploited every weakness. Arrows rained down. Attacks intensified. Pressure increased relentlessly. Eventually, the army began breaking apart. Some infantry abandoned positions in desperate attempts to reach water. Others collapsed from exhaustion. Command structures deteriorated. Confusion spread. The battle transformed into a disaster. The Templars fought fiercely. So did the Hospitallers. So did many knights of the kingdom. Individual acts of courage occurred everywhere. But courage could not reverse strategic reality. The army was exhausted, surrounded, outmaneuvered, and increasingly fragmented. By the end of the day, the Crusader field army had effectively ceased to exist. The defeat was total. One of the greatest military disasters in Crusader history had unfolded. Its consequences extended far beyond the battlefield. King Guy was captured. Many nobles were captured. The relic known as the True Cross was captured. This sacred object held immense symbolic significance. Its loss shocked Christian observers throughout Europe. The military orders suffered catastrophic casualties. Large numbers of Templars died. Large numbers of Hospitallers died. Many of those captured faced grim fates. Saladin treated noble prisoners relatively well. Ransom remained a standard practice in medieval warfare. Important captives possessed value. The military orders represented a different situation. Saladin viewed the Templars and Hospitallers as uniquely dangerous opponents. They were professional warriors, highly motivated, unlikely to abandon the struggle. According to contemporary accounts, many captured members of the military orders were executed. The event became one of the most infamous episodes of the crusading era. For the Templars, the losses were devastating. Years of experience vanished in a single day. Veteran warriors died. Command structure suffered. Morale suffered. Reputation suffered. Yet the greatest disaster was still to come. The road to Jerusalem now lay open. The kingdom no longer possessed a field army capable of stopping Saladin. Cities faced impossible choices: resist and risk destruction, or surrender and hope for mercy. One after another, positions fell. Some surrendered. Some resisted briefly. Few could hold for long. The strategic consequences of Hattin became painfully clear. Without an army, fortifications stood isolated. Without coordination, defenses collapsed. The kingdom unraveled. Saladin advanced steadily. Every success increased momentum. Every surrender weakened remaining resistance. Then came Jerusalem. The city stood at the center of everything. Religiously, politically, emotionally. Its capture in 1099 had launched generations of pilgrimage and devotion. Its loss would shock the Christian world. Yet circumstances differed dramatically from those of the First Crusade. The defenders understood reality. Relief was unlikely. Resources were limited. The city could not withstand endless siege. Negotiations began. Unlike the bloody conquest of 1099, Saladin pursued a more controlled approach. Terms were arranged. Many inhabitants were allowed to ransom themselves. Others departed under various agreements. Not everyone escaped hardship. Many poorer residents faced enslavement. Families were separated. Lives were disrupted. But there was no massacre comparable to the events of 1099. On October 2nd, 1187, Jerusalem surrendered. After 88 years of Crusader rule, the Holy City returned to Muslim control. The emotional impact across Europe was immense. News traveled slowly. Weeks passed, then months. But when reports arrived, reactions were intense. Shock, grief, anger, disbelief. How could Jerusalem have been lost? How could the city won by the First Crusade disappear so quickly? How could such a dramatic collapse occur? Churches held services. Preachers delivered sermons. Kings received urgent messages. The crisis dominated discussion throughout Christendom. The Templars faced a particularly painful reality. Their founding purpose centered on protecting pilgrims and defending the Holy Land. Now Jerusalem was gone. The kingdom they had spent decades supporting lay in ruins. Many of their brothers were dead. Many castles were lost. Many roads no longer existed under Christian control. Everything the order had worked to preserve appeared on the verge of collapse. Criticism emerged. Questions emerged. Some blamed specific leaders. Many blamed Gerard Aridefort. Others blamed broader political failures. Historians continue debating responsibility centuries later. The reality is complicated. No single individual caused the disaster. Years of strategic problems contributed. Political divisions contributed. Saladin's leadership contributed. Environmental conditions contributed. Yet Hattin became a symbol of catastrophic misjudgment, a symbol of opportunities lost. a symbol of how quickly fortunes can change. For a moment, it appeared possible that the Crusader presence in the Holy Land might disappear entirely. Saladin seemed unstoppable. The kingdom of Jerusalem had been shattered. Its capital had fallen. Its army had been destroyed. Its future looked bleak. Yet history often produces unexpected recoveries. The fall of Jerusalem did not end the crusading movement. Instead, it ignited one of the most powerful responses medieval Europe had ever witnessed. Across the continent, rulers began preparing. Armies began assembling. A new crusade began taking shape. And among the leaders who answered the call would be one of the most famous kings of the Middle Ages. A ruler whose name would become legendary. Richard the Lionheart. The Templars had survived Hattin. Barely. Now, they faced the challenge of rebuilding amid disaster. The struggle for the Holy Land was not over. In many ways, it was entering its most famous chapter. The loss of Jerusalem sent shockwaves across Europe unlike anything seen since the First Crusade had been proclaimed nearly a century earlier. For many Christians, the Holy City was not simply another distant possession. Jerusalem occupied a unique place in the medieval imagination. It was the city of Christ, the destination of countless pilgrims, the spiritual center of the Christian world. Its fall felt personal. Even those who would never see Jerusalem with their own eyes experienced the news as a collective wound. Church bells rang, prayers were offered, sermons echoed through cathedrals and village churches alike. Preachers spoke of loss, of duty, of the need for action. The disaster at Hattin and the fall of Jerusalem became proof in the minds of many that Christendom had failed in its responsibilities. A new crusade became inevitable. The response was extraordinary. This would become known as the Third Crusade. Unlike many earlier expeditions, it attracted some of the most powerful rulers in Europe. Men whose names would endure long after countless others had faded from memory. The first to move was the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa. By the time Jerusalem fell, Frederick was already an elderly man. He was approximately 70 years old. In an era when many people died decades earlier, his age alone was remarkable. Yet despite his years, he remained respected throughout Europe. He possessed immense prestige, military experience, political authority, and unlike many rulers who merely talked about crusading, Frederick acted. He assembled a vast army. Modern historians debate its exact size. Medieval chroniclers often exaggerated numbers dramatically. Whatever the precise figure, Frederick's force was enormous by the standards of the age. Tens of thousands marched eastward. The sight must have been astonishing. Columns of soldiers stretching for miles. Banners fluttering above armored knights. Supply trains creaking behind them. Priests accompanying warriors. Nobles leading retainers. An entire moving society heading toward the Holy Land. For a time, hope surged. Perhaps Jerusalem could be recovered. Perhaps the disaster could be reversed. Perhaps the Crusader States could be restored. Then tragedy struck. In June 1190, while crossing a river in Anatolia, Frederick drowned. The exact circumstances remain unclear. Some accounts claim he fell from his horse. Others suggest illness contributed. Regardless of the details, the result was devastating. The emperor was dead, and with his death, much of the momentum behind the German crusading effort collapsed. Many soldiers returned home. Others continued. But the great army that had inspired so much optimism never reached the Holy Land intact. The crusade had lost one of its strongest leaders before the decisive fighting even began. Attention shifted increasingly toward two younger kings, Philip II of France and Richard I of England. Their relationship was complicated from the beginning. At times they cooperated. At times they distrusted one another. Political realities shaped every interaction. Both men possessed ambitions extending far beyond the crusade itself. Yet for the moment, they shared a common objective: the defense of Christian territories in the East. Richard quickly emerged as the more famous figure. History remembers him as Richard the Lionheart. The nickname reflects the reputation he earned both during his lifetime and afterward. Richard embodied many ideals associated with medieval kingship. He was brave, aggressive, energetic, skilled in warfare. He inspired loyalty among followers. He also possessed flaws. He could be arrogant, impulsive, demanding, yet even critics often acknowledged his military talent. When Richard arrived in the Eastern Mediterranean, he immediately attracted attention. The Crusader cause desperately needed a commander capable of restoring confidence. Many believed Richard might be that man. Meanwhile, events in the Holy Land continued unfolding. The focal point became the city of Acre. Located on the Mediterranean coast, Acre was one of the most important ports in the region. Control of Acre meant access to supplies, reinforcements, trade routes, communication with Europe. Its strategic value was immense. Following the disaster at Hattin, Acre had fallen to Saladin. Recovering it became the primary objective of the crusading armies. The siege that developed around the city was among the most extraordinary military operations of the Middle Ages. For nearly 2 years, fighting continued. The situation became almost surreal. Crusaders surrounded Acre. Saladin's army surrounded the Crusaders. One army besieged a city, while another army besieged the besiegers. Disease spread. Food shortages occurred. Battles erupted regularly. The siege became a grinding test of endurance. Thousands suffered. Thousands died. Yet neither side achieved decisive success. The Templars played a major role throughout these operations. They provided experienced fighters, military advice, organizational support. After the catastrophe of Hattin, the Order desperately needed to rebuild its reputation. The siege offered an opportunity. Templar Knights fought on the front lines, participated in assaults, defended positions during counterattacks. Their professionalism remained valuable even amid chaos. The Order had suffered terrible losses, but remained capable. Its surviving members continued doing what they had always done: fighting, holding positions, enduring hardship. Then Richard arrived. His presence altered the atmosphere almost immediately. Unlike many rulers, Richard preferred active involvement. He inspected defenses, directed operations, participated in military planning. His energy impressed supporters and intimidated opponents. Soon, pressure on Acre intensified. Assaults increased. Siege engines battered walls. Defenders faced growing strain. Finally, in July 1191, Acre surrendered. The victory represented the first major success of the Third Crusade. Celebrations erupted. Morale improved. The Crusaders finally possessed a significant achievement after years of setbacks. Yet victory quickly gave way to controversy. Part of the surrender agreement involved prisoners and ransom payments. Negotiations became complicated. Delays occurred. Frustrations mounted. Richard eventually made a decision that remains one of the most debated actions of his career. He ordered the execution of thousands of Muslim prisoners. The killings shocked many observers. Even by the standards of medieval warfare, the scale was extraordinary. Richard intended the act as a demonstration of resolve, a warning to enemies, a statement that delays and broken agreements would carry consequences. Whether it achieved those objectives remains debated. What is certain is that the event hardened attitudes on both sides. The conflict became even more bitter. The Templars, whose own members had been executed after Hattin, did not publicly oppose Richard's actions. The memory of those earlier massacres remained fresh. Hatred and revenge were powerful forces in the crusading world. Meanwhile, political tensions among Crusader leaders continued. Philip of France soon departed for Europe. Official explanations included illness and political necessity. Unofficial explanations often focused on rivalry with Richard. Whatever the reason, his departure left Richard as the dominant figure within the Crusader leadership. The campaign now entered a new phase. The objective was straightforward in theory. Advance along the coast, secure territory, create conditions that might eventually allow the recovery of Jerusalem. In practice, accomplishing these goals proved extremely difficult. Saladin remained a formidable opponent. His army remained intact. His leadership remained effective. The Crusaders could win battles, but destroying Saladin's power entirely was another matter. Richard organized a march southward from Acre toward Jaffa. The operation became one of the most famous military movements of the medieval period. Discipline was essential. The army traveled in carefully arranged formations. Supply ships moved along the coastline. Infantry protected vulnerable positions. Cavalry remained ready for sudden action. The Templars occupied one of the most dangerous roles. They formed part of the vanguard, the front of the marching column. Their responsibilities were enormous. They had to detect threats, respond quickly, maintain order, and absorb attacks intended to disrupt the advance. Saladin understood exactly what Richard was attempting. He refused to allow the march to proceed uncontested. His forces shadowed the Crusaders constantly. Mounted archers harassed them. Attacks erupted without warning. Arrows rained down. Pressure remained relentless. The objective was simple. Wear down the army. Create confusion. Force mistakes. The Templars bore much of this pressure. Day after day, they endured attacks. Day after day, they maintained discipline. The march became a test of endurance as much as military skill. Eventually, Saladin decided conditions favored a major engagement. Near a place called Arsuf, he launched a large-scale attack. The resulting battle became one of the most celebrated victories of Richard's career. The fighting was intense. Muslim forces attacked repeatedly. Arrow fire inflicted casualties. The Crusaders absorbed punishment while maintaining formation. Richard understood the importance of timing. A premature charge could destroy cohesion. A delayed charge could allow the enemy to gain momentum. The challenge was waiting for the right moment. For hours, the army endured pressure. Among those suffering most heavily were the Hospitallers positioned near the rear. Their losses mounted. Their frustration grew. Repeated requests for permission to attack were denied. Richard insisted on patience. Eventually, discipline broke. Some Hospitallers charged without authorization. The situation suddenly became critical. An uncontrolled attack could unravel the entire formation. Richard reacted immediately. Recognizing that events had reached a decisive point, he ordered a general advance. The Crusader cavalry surged forward. The impact was devastating. Heavy knights smashed into Muslim formations. The Templars charged from one sector. Other contingents struck elsewhere. Momentum shifted rapidly. Saladin's army, so effective during harassment and maneuver warfare, struggled against the concentrated force of the attack. The battle ended in Crusader victory. Arsuf became a symbol of recovery. Proof that Saladin could be defeated. Proof that Hattin had not permanently destroyed Crusader military effectiveness. For the Templars, the battle carried special significance. Their reputation had suffered after Hattin. Now, they demonstrated once again why they were feared across the region. The victory restored confidence. Yet despite success, strategic realities remained stubborn. Winning battles was easier than recovering Jerusalem. The city lay inland, far from secure coastal supply lines. Any attempt to capture it would require enormous resources. And even if captured, holding it posed another challenge entirely. Richard confronted these realities repeatedly. Twice he advanced toward Jerusalem. Twice he approached the possibility of an assault. Twice he hesitated. The Templars played an important role in these decisions. Unlike many visiting crusaders, they understood local conditions intimately. They had lived in the region for decades. They knew the terrain, the logistics, the politics. Their advice was often cautious. Recovering Jerusalem might be possible. Holding it would be far more difficult. A symbolic victory could become a strategic disaster if the city fell again immediately afterward. Many crusaders hated hearing this. They had crossed continents for Jerusalem, not for calculations about supply lines and defensive positions. Yet military reality remained unchanged regardless of emotion. Richard eventually accepted the truth. Without greater resources and broader territorial control, Jerusalem could not be secured permanently. The dream remained beyond reach. Negotiations resumed. War had exhausted both sides. Neither Richard nor Saladin could achieve complete victory. Compromise became increasingly attractive. In 1192, a truce was agreed upon. The arrangement preserved Crusader control over portions of the coastline. Christian pilgrims regained access to Jerusalem. The city itself remained under Muslim control. Neither side obtained everything it wanted. Neither side suffered total defeat. The Third Crusade ended in an uneasy balance. Richard returned to Europe. Saladin remained in the east. The Templars stayed where they had always stayed, on the frontier, guarding castles, patrolling roads, preparing for future conflicts. The Crusader States had survived. That alone represented a remarkable achievement after the catastrophe of Hattin. Yet survival was not victory. Jerusalem remained lost. The balance of power had shifted permanently. The Templars understood this perhaps better than anyone. They had witnessed the rise of Saladin, the destruction of armies, the collapse of kingdoms, the limits of even the greatest crusading efforts. And as the 13th century approached, new challenges were already appearing on the horizon. The age of expansion was over. The age of defense had begun. The Templars would spend the next century fighting not to conquer new lands, but to hold on to what remained. And that struggle would become increasingly desperate. After the Third Crusade ended, the Crusader States still existed. They were smaller, weaker, more vulnerable than before. Yet they had survived. For the Templars, survival carried a price. The dream of easy victories had vanished. The confidence that had followed the First Crusade was gone. The Holy Land would not be secured through a single great campaign. Every mile of territory would have to be defended continuously. Every fortress would have to be maintained. Every road would have to be protected. The Order adapted to this reality, and in doing so, it entered one of the most remarkable phases of its history. If people in Europe imagined the Templars as fearless cavalry charging across battlefields, the reality on the frontier was often very different. The Order increasingly became an organization of castle builders, administrators, engineers, logisticians, defenders. Their survival depended on stone walls as much as swords, perhaps even more. The geography of the Crusader States made fortifications essential. Christian territories existed as isolated pockets surrounded by larger Muslim powers. A strong castle could control roads, protect nearby settlements, store supplies, provide refuge during invasions, serve as a military base, and most importantly, a castle could allow a small force to resist a much larger army. The Templars understood this better than anyone. Over time, they became masters of military architecture. Across the Holy Land, they acquired and strengthened fortresses. Some had existed before. Others were expanded dramatically. Each became part of a defensive network stretching across key regions. One of the most famous examples was Safed. Located high in Galilee, Safed occupied a position of enormous strategic importance. From its heights, observers could watch movements across vast areas of countryside. Control of safe meant influence over important routes and territories. The Templars invested enormous resources there. They transformed it into one of the strongest fortresses in the region. Massive walls rose from the mountaintop. Towers overlooked every approach. Storage facilities held provisions. Cisterns collected precious water. Everything was designed with siege warfare in mind. The castle had to survive isolation. It had to endure attacks. It had to function even when surrounded. Another great stronghold stood along the coast. Castle Pilgrim, known today as It Lit. This fortress represented one of the greatest achievements of Templar engineering. Built on a rocky peninsula extending into the Mediterranean, it occupied a position of extraordinary strength. The sea protected multiple sides. Massive walls guarded the landward approach. Supply ships could reach the fortress even during sieges. The location itself seemed designed by nature for defense. Visitors who saw Castle Pilgrim often struggled to imagine how it could ever fall. The walls were immense, the towers imposing. The entire structure projected confidence. Power, permanence. To the Templars, it symbolized something important, a commitment to remain, a declaration that they would not abandon the Holy Land. Further north stood Tortosa, another key Templar stronghold, another anchor in the defensive system. Each fortress supported others. Messages could move between them. Troops could be dispatched. Warnings could spread rapidly. The castles functioned not as isolated structures, but as interconnected components of a larger strategy. Inside these fortresses, daily life followed a strict routine. Prayer remained central. The religious identity of the order never disappeared. Services occurred regularly. Rules governed behavior. Discipline shaped every aspect of existence. Yet military readiness remained equally important. Weapons required maintenance. Horses required care. Walls required inspection. Training never stopped. A castle garrison had to be prepared for sudden attack at any moment. The frontier offered few guarantees. Life could shift from routine to crisis with astonishing speed. The castles also served administrative functions. This aspect of Templar history is often overlooked. Each fortress acted as a center of governance. Commanders collected revenues, managed properties, resolved disputes, oversaw local operations. The order controlled extensive lands surrounding many of its strongholds. Farmers worked these territories. Harvests were collected. Taxes were gathered. Records were maintained. The Templars increasingly resembled a state within a state. Military organization, religious institution, economic enterprise, all combined within a single structure. And this structure required money. A great deal of money. Building castles was expensive. Maintaining castles was expensive. Equipping knights was expensive. Feeding garrisons was expensive. Everything about frontier warfare consumed resources. Fortunately for the Order, Europe continued providing them. The flow of donations never entirely stopped. Land grants expanded. Financial contributions increased. The Templars became major landowners across much of the continent. By the beginning of the 13th century, their holdings stretched across enormous distances. In France, England, Scotland, Portugal, Spain, Italy, Germany, the list continued. Thousands of properties fell under Templar administration. Some are farms, others were vineyards, some are mills, others were urban buildings. Each generated income. Each contributed to the larger mission. The Order developed systems for managing this wealth with remarkable efficiency. Compared to many contemporary institutions, the Templars were highly organized. They maintained records, tracked revenues, monitored expenditures, moved resources across great distances. This administrative sophistication became one of their defining characteristics. The average medieval noble might focus primarily on local concerns. The Templars thought internationally. Their network connected distant regions. A donation in England could support operations in Palestine. Revenue from a French estate could help maintain a castle near the Syrian frontier. Resources flowed continuously across the organization. As these systems expanded, an unexpected development occurred. The Templars entered the world of finance. The process began with practical needs. Pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land faced serious risks. Carrying large amounts of money invited robbery. Bandits targeted wealthy travelers. Losses could be devastating. The Templars possessed a solution. A pilgrim could deposit funds at a Templar house in Europe. In return, he received documentation. Upon reaching the Holy Land, he could present that documentation and recover his money. The system reduced risk significantly. Travel became safer. The service proved popular. Over time, these practices evolved. The order developed increasingly sophisticated financial operations. Money moved through Templar networks. Transactions were recorded. Accounts were maintained. Trust became their greatest asset. People believed the Templars would honor agreements. That trust created opportunities. Nobles deposited valuables. Merchants used Templar services. Pilgrims relied upon them. Even kings became clients. The transformation was extraordinary. An organization founded to protect travelers was now helping manage financial transactions across continents. The Templars never resembled modern banks. Yet many historians view them as pioneers in certain areas of medieval finance. Their reputation for reliability made them valuable partners. The Paris Temple became particularly important. Located in France, it evolved into one of the most significant financial centers in Europe. Kings stored wealth there. Officials conducted transactions there. Records accumulated there. The institution's influence extended far beyond the battlefield. This success brought enormous wealth. And with wealth came contradictions. The Templars had originally embraced poverty. Their founders had shared horses because resources were scarce. Now the order controlled vast estates, managed substantial revenues, maintained impressive buildings. Critics began asking uncomfortable questions. How could a brotherhood sworn to poverty possess so much property? How could warrior monks accumulate such wealth? The Templars responded with a distinction. Individual members remained poor. They owned little personally. The wealth belonged to the order, not to specific knights. According to this argument, resources existed to support the mission, to defend the Holy Land, to protect pilgrims, to serve Christendom. Many accepted this explanation. Others remained skeptical. The debate never fully disappeared. As decades passed, it grew louder. Yet for the moment, success overshadowed criticism. The Templars stood near the height of their power. Their influence reached across Europe. Their castles dominated portions of the Holy Land. Their financial network connected distant regions. Their reputation remained formidable. Few institutions could match their combination of wealth, military strength, and international reach. But beneath the surface, deeper problems were emerging. The Crusader States remained vulnerable. Victories became increasingly rare. Resources were stretched, and new powers were rising. The Muslim world was changing. Leadership was changing. Military structures were changing. The age that had produced Saladin had not ended. A new generation was preparing to continue the struggle. Meanwhile, enthusiasm for crusading in Europe began showing signs of fatigue. The First Crusade had inspired enormous excitement. The Third Crusade had attracted kings. But maintaining that level of commitment forever was impossible. Generations passed. Political priorities shifted. Wars closer to home demanded attention. The Holy Land no longer occupied the same place in every ruler's imagination. The Templars noticed the change. Recruitment continued. Donations continued. Yet the broader mood felt different. The great wave of crusading enthusiasm was slowly receding. and as support weakened, enemies grew stronger. The 13th century would become a century of mounting pressure. One fortress after another would face attack. One territory after another would be threatened. The Templars would fight harder than ever. They would display extraordinary courage. But increasingly, they would be fighting against forces larger than themselves. The age of expansion was gone. The age of survival had begun. And soon, a new enemy would emerge whose relentless campaigns would push the Crusader States toward their final crisis. The Mamluks. And against them, even the greatest Templar castles would eventually be tested. By the opening years of the 13th century, the world that had created the Crusader States was changing. The changes did not happen all at once. They unfolded slowly, year after year, campaign after campaign, generation after generation. Many people living through the period may not have fully realized what was happening. Yet in hindsight, the pattern is unmistakable. The balance of power was shifting, and it was shifting against the Crusaders. The Templars remained strong. Their castles still stood. Their estates still generated revenue. Their network still stretched across Europe. But beneath these signs of strength lay an uncomfortable reality. The Order existed to defend the Holy Land, and the Holy Land was becoming increasingly difficult to defend. The first warning signs appeared in the broader, crusading movement itself. The great energy that had fueled the First Crusade could not be recreated indefinitely. Every generation faced different concerns, different wars, different political priorities. Some rulers remained enthusiastic about crusading. Others viewed it as a costly distraction. The ideal survived. The commitment weakened. Nothing illustrated this better than the Fourth Crusade. When Pope Innocent III called for a new crusade at the end of the 12th century, the goal was clear. The Holy Land, Jerusalem, the recovery of Christian territory. What followed shocked many observers. Instead of reaching Palestine, the crusading army became entangled in political disputes and financial obligations. Eventually, it turned against Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, a Christian city, one of the greatest cities in the world. In 1204, Crusaders stormed Constantinople. The city was looted. Churches were stripped of treasures. Ancient relics disappeared. Buildings were damaged. Thousands suffered. The event left deep scars across the Christian world. For many observers, it represented a profound betrayal of the crusading ideal. The Templars largely avoided major involvement in the disaster. Their focus remained fixed on the Holy Land. Yet the damage had been done. Resources that might have gone toward Palestine had been consumed elsewhere. Attention had been diverted. Opportunities had been lost. The Crusader States remained vulnerable, and time was not on their side. Despite these setbacks, moments of hope still appeared. One of the most remarkable occurred during the reign of Emperor Frederick II. Frederick was one of the most unusual rulers of the Middle Ages. Highly educated, intelligent, ambitious, controversial, he fascinated admirers and infuriated critics. His relationship with the church was particularly turbulent. At times he was excommunicated. At times he openly challenged papal authority. Many church leaders distrusted him deeply. The Templars were among those who viewed him with suspicion. Yet Frederick achieved something few thought possible. In 1229, through negotiation rather than conquest, he secured control of Jerusalem. No great battle had been fought. No massive crusading army had stormed the city. Diplomacy accomplished what warfare had failed to achieve. For a brief moment, Jerusalem returned to Christian hands. The achievement was extraordinary, and yet it carried limitations. The agreement rested upon political circumstances rather than military dominance. Its foundations were fragile. Many contemporaries doubted it would last. They were correct. Only 15 years later, Jerusalem was lost again. This time the loss proved permanent. The city would never again become the capital of a Crusader kingdom. For the Templars, The second loss of Jerusalem carried enormous symbolic weight. The city that had inspired their creation. The city whose pilgrims they had vowed to protect. The city around which so much crusading energy had revolved. It was gone, and now even optimism became difficult. The Order continued fighting, continued recruiting, continued maintaining castles. Yet the strategic picture grew darker. Across the Muslim world, new forces were rising, and among them emerged one of the most formidable military systems of the medieval age. The Mamluks. The origins of the Mamluks were unusual. Originally, they had been military slaves. Young boys, often from Turkic or Caucasian backgrounds, were purchased, converted to Islam, and trained as elite soldiers. The system produced warriors of extraordinary skill. Discipline defined their lives. Military excellence became their identity. Over time, these soldiers accumulated influence. Eventually, they seized power themselves. The servants became rulers. The slaves became sultans. And once they controlled Egypt, they inherited one of the richest and most strategically important regions in the world. The Crusaders soon discovered that the Mamluks were unlike many previous opponents. They were organized, aggressive, experienced, and utterly committed to removing Christian states from the eastern Mediterranean. No Mamluk ruler embodied these qualities more completely than Sultan Baybars. Baybars became one of the most feared figures in Crusader history. He combined military talent with political skill. He understood strategy. He understood psychology. And he pursued his objectives with relentless determination. Unlike some earlier rulers who divided their attention among multiple priorities, Baybars focused intensely on the destruction of Crusader power. He advanced systematically, methodically, patiently. The Templars soon found themselves confronting an enemy who rarely made major mistakes. The struggle intensified during the 1260s. Fortresses that had seemed secure suddenly faced enormous pressure. Cities that had survived for generations became vulnerable. The defensive network, painstakingly built over decades, began showing signs of strain. One by one, positions came under attack. One by one, they faced siege. One by one, they fell. In 1265, Baybars captured important coastal cities. The following years brought additional losses. The pressure never stopped. Every victory strengthened Mamluk confidence. Every defeat weakened Crusader morale. The Templars fought hard, sometimes brilliantly, but courage could not reverse strategic realities. The enemy possessed momentum, resources, and growing superiority. One of the most devastating blows came with the loss of Safed. For the Templars, Safed was more than a fortress. It represented decades of investment, years of labor, an enormous commitment of resources. The castle stood among the strongest positions in the Holy Land. Many considered it nearly impregnable. Yet, even great fortresses have limits. When Baybars attacked, he brought determination and expertise. The siege dragged on. Pressure mounted. Eventually, the defenders surrendered after receiving promises of safety. What happened next became infamous. The promises were broken. The garrison was massacred. The loss sent shockwaves through the military orders. Safed had seemed secure. If Safe could fall, what fortress could truly be considered safe? The lesson was devastating. No wall was invincible. No position guaranteed survival. Baybars continued advancing. In 1268, Antioch fell. The city possessed immense historical significance. One of the great centers of early Christianity. One of the oldest Crusader states. Its loss represented another major turning point. The population suffered terribly. Many were killed. Many were enslaved. The psychological impact extended far beyond military calculations. The map of the Crusader East was shrinking, and everyone could see it. Throughout these years, the Templars remained on the front lines. Their reputation for courage persisted. Their discipline remained impressive. Again and again, they defended hopeless positions. Again and again, they fought against overwhelming odds. Again and again, they paid for those efforts in blood. Yet heroism alone could not solve the underlying problem. The Crusader States depended on support from Europe. Without reinforcements, without money, without new armies, long-term survival was impossible. And support from Europe was becoming increasingly unreliable. Crusades continued to be announced. Preachers continued to call for action. Kings continued making promises. But fewer people answered. The enthusiasm that had once launched massive expeditions across continents no longer existed in the same form. The Templars watched this decline with growing concern. They understood what many distant observers did not. Every fortress required defenders. Every campaign required funding. Every loss reduced future options. Without substantial assistance, eventual defeat became increasingly likely. Even the appearance of a new potential ally failed to change the outcome. During the middle of the century, rumors spread about the Mongols. These warriors from Central Asia had created the largest land empire in history. They conquered kingdoms at astonishing speed. Cities fell before them. Entire regions submitted. The Mongols shattered old political systems wherever they appeared. When they advanced into the Middle East, many crusaders viewed them as a possible solution. Perhaps the Mongols would destroy the enemies of the Crusader States. Perhaps an alliance could be formed. Perhaps circumstances would finally shift. For a brief moment, these hopes seemed plausible. Then reality intervened. The Mongols pursued their own interests. Their goals rarely aligned perfectly with those of the Crusaders. And although they inflicted tremendous damage upon Muslim powers, they also terrified potential allies. Their reputation for brutality was legendary. Any dreams of a grand Christian Mongol alliance gradually faded. Then came another decisive moment. In 1260, the Mongols suffered a major defeat at Ain Jalut. The victors were the Mamluks. The consequences were enormous. The battle halted Mongol expansion in the region. It confirmed Mamluk strength, and it established Egypt as the dominant military power of the Eastern Mediterranean. For the Crusader States, the implications were grim. Their strongest enemy had just proven capable of defeating another seemingly unstoppable force. From that point forward, the strategic situation deteriorated steadily. The Templars adapted as best they could. They negotiated temporary truces, strengthened defenses, concentrated resources. Yet each year brought new challenges. The map continued shrinking. Castles that once anchored large territories became isolated outposts. Cities became islands surrounded by hostile forces. The defensive network contracted. Hope narrowed. By the late 13th century, the reality was becoming impossible to ignore. The Crusader States were dying, not through a single catastrophic defeat like Hattin, but through gradual erosion. A fortress lost here, a city lost there, a campaign failed, a reinforcement delayed, a donation reduced. Small setbacks accumulated until they became a larger disaster. The Templars understood this better than anyone. They had spent generations defending these lands. They knew every road, every fortress, every battlefield. They could see the end approaching, yet they continued fighting, because fighting was what they had been created to do, and because surrendering the mission was unthinkable. As the century drew toward its close, nearly all that remained of Crusader Palestine centered on a single city. Acre, the last great stronghold, the final major link between Europe and the Holy Land. Inside its walls gathered nobles, merchants, refugees, knights, military orders, the surviving remnants of 2 centuries of Crusader history. Everyone understood what Acre represented. If the city survived, hope survived. If the city fell, the Crusader dream would likely die with it. The Templars prepared accordingly. They strengthened defenses, stockpiled supplies, reinforced fortifications, and waited. Beyond the walls, the Mamluks were preparing as well. The final confrontation was approaching, and when it came, it would be one of the most dramatic sieges of the medieval world. The fall of Acre would not simply mark the loss of a city. It would mark the end of an era the Templars had helped create, an era they had spent nearly 2 centuries defending, and an era they were about to watch disappear forever. By the year 1291, the Crusader world had been reduced to a shadow of what it had once been. The great victories of the First Crusade belonged to distant memory. The kingdom that had once stretched across large portions of the Levant had been broken apart piece by piece. Fortresses had fallen. Cities had been abandoned. Territories had disappeared. Only fragments remained. And among those fragments, none was more important than Acre. Acre was not merely another city. It had become the heart of what remained of Crusader Palestine. The city served as a port, a military center, a commercial hub, a political capital, a refuge. Its streets were crowded with merchants from across the Mediterranean. Its warehouses held goods arriving from Europe. Its harbor connected the east and the west. Its walls sheltered refugees who had fled from fallen territories. If one wanted to understand the final phase of Crusader history, one needed only to look at Acre. Inside its walls lived people who represented the last survivors of a shrinking world. Nobles whose lands had been lost. Families driven from conquered towns. Knights who had spent their lives defending territories that no longer existed. Priests who remembered earlier generations. Merchants who depended on trade routes, now threatened by war. And among them stood the military orders. The Templars, the Hospitallers, the Teutonic Knights. Each maintained powerful compounds inside the city. Each understood what was at stake. Each knew that Acre represented the final line. Beyond the walls of Acre, the Mamluk Sultanate had become stronger than ever. The rulers of Egypt had spent decades systematically dismantling Crusader power. Now they intended to finish the task. The man leading this effort was Sultan al-Ashraf Khalil. He inherited the determination of his predecessors, and he possessed the resources needed to carry out their vision. In the spring of 1291, the Mamluk army advanced toward Acre. The scale of the operation immediately alarmed the defenders. Medieval chroniclers described enormous numbers. Some claimed 100,000 soldiers. Others suggested even more. Modern historians believe these figures were exaggerated. Yet there is no doubt that the Mamluk army vastly outnumbered the defenders. The city faced overwhelming force. Along with soldiers came siege engineers, massive siege engines, supplies, equipment, everything necessary for a prolonged campaign. This was not a raid, not a limited operation, not an attempt to pressure the city into concessions. This was a war of destruction. The objective was clear. Acre would fall. The defenders understood this immediately. Preparations intensified. Walls were inspected. Weapons distributed. Food stockpiled. Positions assigned. Every available fighter was needed. The Templars mobilized all the strength they could gather. Their Grand Master, Guillaume de Beaujeu, took personal command of the Order's forces. De Beaujeu was an experienced leader. He had spent years warning European rulers about the danger facing the Crusader States. Repeatedly, he had called for support. Repeatedly, he had emphasized the seriousness of the situation. Now those warnings had become reality. The city was surrounded, and no great relief army was coming. The siege began. Day after day, Mamluk siege engines battered the defenses. Massive stones crashed against towers. Walls shook under repeated impacts. Dust filled the air. Sections of fortification weakened. Engineers worked constantly, repairing damage, strengthening vulnerable areas, attempting to delay the inevitable. At the same time, Mamluk miners dug tunnels beneath the walls. This technique represented one of the greatest threats in medieval siege warfare. If supports beneath a wall could be destroyed, entire sections might collapse. The defenders responded with counter-mining operations. Underground battles erupted. Men fought beneath the earth in darkness and confined spaces. The struggle extended above ground and below. Every day brought casualties. Every day brought new damage. Yet Acre continued resisting. The Templars played a crucial role throughout the siege. Their compound occupied one of the strongest positions in the city. Their knights participated in defense operations across multiple sectors. Again and again they launched sorties. Small attacks designed to disrupt enemy efforts. Sometimes they targeted siege equipment. Sometimes engineers. Sometimes work crews. These operations were dangerous, but they bought time, and time was precious. The defenders hoped for miracles, reinforcements, political changes, anything that might alter the situation. Nothing came. The siege tightened. Weeks passed. Pressure increased. The walls began failing. By May, serious breaches had appeared. The Mamluks intensified their attacks. Every weakness became a target. Every damaged section faced concentrated assault. The defenders fought desperately. But numbers mattered. Resources mattered. Momentum mattered. The balance increasingly favored the attackers. Then came the final assault. On May 18th, 1291, the Mamluks launched a massive coordinated attack. The entire defensive system came under pressure simultaneously. Scaling ladders appeared. Troops surged toward breaches. Arrows darkened the sky. The noise must have been overwhelming. Shouting, screaming, metal striking metal, stone collapsing. The sounds of a city fighting for its life. Guillaume de Beaujeu moved through the fighting personally. Like many military leaders of the age, he did not remain safely behind the lines. He participated directly, encouraging defenders, directing resistance, leading by example. During the battle, he was struck by a crossbow bolt. The wound proved fatal. Accounts describe him attempting to continue despite his injury. Eventually he collapsed. The Grand Master of the Templars was dead. His death symbolized the fate of the city itself. The defense was collapsing. The breaches widened. Mamluk forces poured into Acre. Street fighting erupted. Order broke down. Panic spread. The city became a battlefield. Every road, every building, every intersection, defenders attempted to hold positions. Many fought courageously, but the outcome could no longer be changed. Acre had fallen. The city that represented the last great Crusader stronghold was lost. For civilians, the consequences were terrible. Thousands rushed toward the harbor, desperate to find ships, desperate to escape. Families became separated. Crowds surged through narrow streets. Fear consumed everything. Some reached safety. Many did not. Amid this chaos, the Templars retreated to their fortified compound. The structure functioned almost as a castle within the city. Its defenses remained formidable. Its walls still stood. Its towers still resisted. Hundreds of civilians sought refuge inside. Women, children, survivors of the catastrophe unfolding around them. The Templars opened their gates. They knew what would happen if the Mamluks captured the refugees. For a brief moment, the compound became the final refuge of Crusader Acre, the last surviving fragment of resistance. Outside, the city was gone. Inside, the Templars prepared for one final stand. The Mamluks understood the importance of the position. As long as the Templar fortress remained unconquered, resistance technically continued. Negotiations briefly occurred. Terms were discussed. Promises were made. But trust had disappeared long ago. Years of warfare had destroyed confidence. Too many agreements had been broken. Too many massacres had followed surrenders. The Templars chose resistance. They would fight. And so the siege continued, now reduced to a single fortress. The defenders held out for days. Attack after attack struck the compound. Attack after attack failed. The Templars inflicted heavy casualties. Their reputation for determination remained intact until the very end. Yet even the strongest fortress has limits. Eventually, Mamluk engineers succeeded in undermining part of the structure. Supports collapsed. Walls weakened. Sections of the fortress came crashing down. The destruction killed attackers and defenders alike. But it opened the way. The final assault followed. The remaining Templars fought to the death. Very few surrendered. Most chose the path that generations of Templar tradition had encouraged. Resistance until the end. When the fighting finally ceased, the fortress lay in ruins. The defenders were dead. The refugees were gone. The last Templar stronghold in Acre had fallen. With that moment, something larger than a city disappeared. The Crusader States effectively ceased to exist. 2 centuries of history ended. The dream that had begun with the First Crusade was over. The Kingdom of Jerusalem no longer survived. The great coastal cities were gone. The network of territories created by generations of Crusaders had vanished. For the Templars, the consequences were profound. Their entire reason for existence had been tied to the Holy Land. They had been founded to protect pilgrims, to defend Christian territory, to maintain a permanent military presence in Palestine. Now, there was no territory left to defend. The Order survived, but its mission had suffered a fatal blow. After Acre's fall, remaining positions were evacuated. Castle Pilgrim, one of the strongest fortresses ever built by the Order, was abandoned, not because its walls had failed, but because strategic reality made continued occupation impossible. Without Acre, resupply became too difficult. Without surrounding support, isolation became fatal. The garrison departed by sea. The fortress was left behind. The same process repeated elsewhere. One by one, surviving outposts were abandoned. The Templars withdrew to Cyprus. The island became their new center of operations. There they regrouped, reorganized, and considered the future. Officially, the dream of reconquest remained alive. Plans were discussed, strategies proposed, future crusades imagined. But reality was changing. Europe was changing. The crusading movement was changing. And many people quietly recognized what few wished to say aloud. The age of the Crusader States had ended. The Templars still possessed wealth. They still possessed influence. They still possessed international networks. Yet they no longer possessed the mission around which everything had been built. For nearly 2 centuries, every castle, every donation, every battle, every sacrifice had served a clear purpose. Now that purpose was gone, and an institution without a purpose becomes vulnerable. The Templars did not yet realize it. Few did, but the fall of Acre marked more than the end of Christian rule in the Holy Land. It marked the beginning of the final chapter in the history of the Order itself, because the enemies who would ultimately destroy the Templars were not waiting in Palestine. They were waiting in Europe, and within only a few years, the most powerful king in Western Christendom would begin looking at the wealth of the Templars with growing interest. The Holy Land had been lost. The mission was broken, and now, for the first time in their history, the greatest threat to the Knights Templar would come not from Muslim armies, but from a Christian king. After the fall of Acre, the Knights Templar entered unfamiliar territory. For nearly 2 centuries, their purpose had been clear: protect pilgrims, defend the Holy Land, fight for the survival of the Crusader States. Every decision had revolved around that mission. Every sacrifice had been justified by it. Now the mission was gone. The Order still existed. Its properties still stretched across Europe. Its treasuries remained full. Its network remained intact. Its privileges remained extraordinary. Yet the reason for its existence had largely disappeared. This created a problem far more dangerous than many Templars understood. An organization built for war still possessed wealth, power, influence, independence, but no battlefield large enough to justify them. The order established its headquarters on Cyprus. The island represented the last major Crusader possession in the eastern Mediterranean. From there, the Templars hoped to rebuild. Some dreamed of launching new campaigns. Some imagined retaking the Holy Land. Others proposed alliances and military reforms. The dream of reconquest survived, but dreams and reality were increasingly different things. Europe had changed. Kings focused on their own kingdoms. Wars between Christian rulers consumed attention. The enthusiasm that had once sent armies across continents had faded. The Templars continued planning for future crusades. Most of Europe had moved on. Leading the order during these difficult years was Jacques de Molay. He became Grand Master in 1292. Unlike later legends, de Molay was not a mysterious figure. He was a veteran Templar, a man who had witnessed the collapse of Crusader Palestine firsthand, a man shaped by decades of warfare, a man who genuinely believed the order could still play an important role. De Molay spent years traveling between Cyprus and Europe. He met rulers, consulted church leaders, discussed future crusades, defended the independence of the order. Again and again he argued that the Templars remained necessary. Again and again he attempted to secure support for renewed action in the East. But circumstances were working against him. The Templars remained wealthy, extremely wealthy. Their estates generated revenue. Their financial operations continued functioning. Their reputation for reliability remained valuable. Kings deposited money with them. Nobles used their services. Church institutions relied upon their network. This wealth had once been viewed as a tool. Now it increasingly appeared as a target. No ruler paid closer attention than King Philip IV of France. History remembers him as Philip the Fair. The nickname referred to his appearance, not necessarily his character. Philip was intelligent, determined, ambitious, and constantly short of money. His government faced financial difficulties. Wars were expensive. Administration was expensive. Royal ambitions required resources. Philip searched continuously for solutions. And whenever he searched for solutions, he often noticed wealth that belonged to others. Before turning against the Templars, Philip had already demonstrated a willingness to seize assets from groups he considered vulnerable. Jewish communities suffered under his policies. Foreign bankers faced pressure. Property changed hands. Confiscations occurred. The pattern was clear. Financial necessity and political opportunity often traveled together. The Templars represented an especially tempting target. They possessed wealth. They possessed independence. They answered directly to the Pope rather than local kings. And they no longer enjoyed the same unquestioned prestige they had held during the height of the Crusades. Criticism had accumulated over the years. Some questioned their wealth. Others questioned their secrecy. Many people knew little about the order's internal ceremonies. Like many medieval institutions, the Templars conducted initiations privately. This secrecy was not unusual. Yet secrecy often attracts suspicion. Rumors began spreading. Stories circulated. Whispers became accusations. Philip paid attention. Whether he initially believed the rumors remains impossible to know. What matters is that he recognized their usefulness. If the Templars could be portrayed as heretics rather than heroes, everything changed. Confiscation could become justice. Greed could become righteousness. Political ambition could become religious duty. The plan that emerged was remarkable for its scale and coordination. Months of preparation occurred in secret. Royal officials received sealed instructions. Information was carefully controlled. Timing was critical. The Templars had survived wars, sieges, battles, but they were not expecting attack from within Christian Europe. They trusted their legal protections. They trusted papal support. They trusted centuries of service. Those assumptions would prove fatal. Then came Friday, October 13th, 1307. At dawn, Royal officers across France moved simultaneously. Templar houses were surrounded. Commanderies were seized. Members of the order were arrested. The operation unfolded with extraordinary efficiency. Most Templars had no warning, no opportunity to organize resistance, no chance to escape. Within hours, hundreds were in custody. Among them was Jacques de Molay himself. The Grand Master had been in Paris, confident, unprepared, completely unaware of what was about to happen. Now he found himself a prisoner. The charges were astonishing. The Templars were accused of heresy, of denying Christ, of spitting on the cross, of worshiping idols, of engaging in obscene rituals, of committing acts that shocked medieval society. The accusations seemed unbelievable, yet they serve a purpose. The more outrageous the charges, the more difficult it became for ordinary people to defend the order. Scandal spread quickly. Curiosity spread even faster. Philip understood public opinion. He understood that accusations alone could inflict enormous damage. Soon interrogations began, and with them came torture. Modern readers sometimes Many fought courageously, but the outcome could no longer be changed. Acre had fallen. The city that represented the last great Crusader stronghold was lost. For civilians, the consequences were terrible. Thousands rushed toward the harbor, desperate to find ships, desperate to escape. Families became separated. Crowds surged through narrow streets. Fear consumed everything. Some reached safety. Many did not. Amid this chaos, the Templars retreated to their fortified compound. The structure functioned almost as a castle within the city. Its defenses remained formidable. Its walls still stood. Its towers still resisted. Hundreds of civilians sought refuge inside. Women, children, survivors of the catastrophe unfolding around them. The Templars opened their gates. They knew what would happen if the Mamluks captured the refugees. For a brief moment, the compound became the final refuge of Crusader Acre, the last surviving fragment of resistance. Outside, the city was gone. Inside, the Templars prepared for one final stand. The Mamluks understood the importance of the position. As long as the Templar fortress remained unconquered, resistance technically continued. Negotiations briefly occurred. Terms were discussed. Promises were made. But trust had disappeared long ago. Years of warfare had destroyed confidence. Too many agreements had been broken. Too many massacres had followed surrenders. The Templars chose resistance. They would fight, and so the siege continued, now reduced to a single fortress. The defenders held out for days. Attack after attack struck the compound. Attack after attack failed. The Templars inflicted heavy casualties. Their reputation for determination remained intact until the very end. Yet even the strongest fortress has limits. Eventually, Mamluk engineers succeeded in undermining part of structure. Supports collapsed. Walls weakened. Sections of the fortress came crashing down. The destruction killed attackers and defenders alike. But it opened the way. The final assault followed. The remaining Templars fought to the death. Very few surrendered. Most chose the path that generations of Templar tradition had encouraged. Resistance until the end. When the fighting finally ceased, the fortress lay in ruins. The defenders were dead. The refugees were gone. The last Templar stronghold in Acre had fallen. With that moment, something larger than a city disappeared. The Crusader States effectively ceased to exist. 2 centuries of history ended. The dream that had begun with the First Crusade was over. The Kingdom of Jerusalem no longer survived. The great coastal cities were gone. The network of territories created by generations of Crusaders had vanished. For the Templars, the consequences were profound. Their entire reason for existence had been tied to the Holy Land. They had been founded to protect pilgrims, to defend Christian territory, to maintain a permanent military presence in Palestine. Now, there was no territory left to defend. The Order survived, but its mission had suffered a fatal blow. After Acre's fall, remaining positions were evacuated. Castle Pilgrim, one of the strongest fortresses ever built by the Order, was abandoned, not because its walls had failed, but because strategic reality made continued occupation impossible. Without Acre, resupply became too difficult. Without surrounding support, isolation became fatal. The garrison departed by sea. The fortress was left behind. The same process repeated elsewhere. One by one, surviving outposts were abandoned. The Templars withdrew to Cyprus. The island became their new center of operations. There they regrouped, reorganized, and considered the future. Officially, the dream of reconquest remained alive. Plans were discussed, strategies proposed, future crusades imagined. But reality was changing. Europe was changing. The crusading movement was changing. And many people quietly recognized what few wished to say aloud. The age of the Crusader States had ended. The Templars still possessed wealth. They still possessed influence. They still possessed international networks. Yet they no longer possessed the mission around which everything had been built. For nearly 2 centuries, every castle, every donation, every battle, every sacrifice had served a clear purpose. Now that purpose was gone, and an institution without a purpose becomes vulnerable. The Templars did not yet realize it. Few did, but the fall of Acre marked more than the end of Christian rule in the Holy Land. It marked the beginning of the final chapter in the history of the Order itself. Because the enemies who would ultimately destroy the Templars were not waiting in Palestine. They were waiting in Europe. And within only a few years, the most powerful king in Western Christendom would begin looking at the wealth of the Templars with growing interest. The Holy Land had been lost. The mission was broken. And now, for the first time in their history, the greatest threat to the Knights Templar would come not from Muslim armies, but from a Christian king. After the fall of Acre, the Knights Templar entered unfamiliar territory. For nearly 2 centuries, their purpose had been clear. Protect pilgrims, defend the Holy Land, fight for the survival of the Crusader States. Every decision had revolved around that mission. Every sacrifice had been justified by it. Now the mission was gone. The Order still existed. Its properties still stretched across Europe. Its treasuries remained full. Its network remained intact. Its privileges remained extraordinary. Yet the reason for its existence had largely disappeared. This created a problem far more dangerous than many Templars understood. An organization built for war still possessed wealth, power, influence, independence, but no battlefield large enough to justify them. The Order established its headquarters on Cyprus. The island represented the last major Crusader possession in the eastern Mediterranean. From there, the Templars hoped to rebuild. Some dreamed of launching new campaigns. Some imagined retaking the Holy Land. Others proposed alliances and military reforms. The dream of reconquest survived, but dreams and reality were increasingly different things. Europe had changed. Kings focused on their own kingdoms. Wars between Christian rulers consumed attention. The enthusiasm that had once sent armies across continents had faded. The Templars continued planning for future crusades. Most of Europe had moved on. Leading the Order during these difficult years was Jacques de Molay. He became Grand Master in 1292. Unlike later legends, de Molay was not a mysterious figure. He was a veteran Templar, a man who had witnessed the collapse of Crusader Palestine firsthand, a man shaped by decades of warfare, a man who genuinely believed the Order could still play an important role. De Molay spent years traveling between Cyprus and Europe. He met rulers, consulted church leaders, discussed future crusades, defended the independence of the Order. Again and again he argued that the Templars remained necessary. Again and again he attempted to secure support for renewed action in the East. But circumstances were working against him. The Templars remained wealthy, extremely wealthy. Their estates generated revenue. Their financial operations continued functioning. Their reputation for reliability remained valuable. Kings deposited money with them. Nobles used their services. Church institutions relied upon their network. This wealth had once been viewed as a tool. Now it increasingly appeared as a target. No ruler paid closer attention than King Philip IV of France. History remembers him as Philip the Fair. The nickname referred to his appearance, not necessarily his character. Philip was intelligent, determined, ambitious, and constantly short of money. His government faced financial difficulties. Wars were expensive. Administration was expensive. Royal ambitions required resources. Philip searched continuously for solutions. And whenever he searched for solutions, he often noticed wealth that belonged to others. Before turning against the Templars, Philip had already demonstrated a willingness to seize assets from groups he considered vulnerable. Jewish communities suffered under his policies. Foreign bankers faced pressure. Property changed hands. Confiscations occurred. The pattern was clear. Financial necessity and political opportunity often traveled together. The Templars represented an especially tempting target. They possessed wealth. They possessed independence. They answered directly to the Pope rather than local kings. And they no longer enjoyed the same unquestioned prestige they had held during the height of the Crusades. Criticism had accumulated over the years. Some questioned their wealth. Others questioned their secrecy. Many people knew little about the order's internal ceremonies.